This is Mrs. Carnes, and we're going to take a look at the distributive property. You are going to need to know how to use the distributive property when you go to simplify expressions before solving equations and inequalities. You use the distributive property when you're multiplying a number to a sum or a difference. So let's take a look at what the property says. For all real numbers, A, B, and C. So A, B, and C are going to take on any real number that you would come across. If the A is in front of the sum B plus C, then the A gets distributed to what's in parentheses. And so we would take A times B to give us AB, and we would then take A and multiply it by C to give us A times C, and the addition sign gets carried over. And the same thing would be true for subtraction. If you had A multiplied by the quantity B minus C, you would multiply A times B, and you would multiply A times C, and you would subtract those. Now it doesn't matter if the number that you're multiplying comes in front of the parentheses or at the end of the parentheses, because if we have an example that looks like this, B plus C, and A is after the parentheses, you still are going to distribute that A through. You're going to take A and you're going to distribute it through, and it'll be B times A. And you'll take A and distribute it through to the C and get C times A, and you'll add them together. But if you remember, multiplication is commutative, and therefore A times B is going to be the same thing as B times A, just like 3 times 5 is the same thing as 5 times 3. Now we do want to take a look at what is not the distributive property. Notice in this example, the 5 is being multiplied to the quantity 2 times 4. But this quantity that's inside the parentheses here, it is not a sum or difference, and therefore this is not the distributive property. You would not distribute the 5 through and multiply it by the 2 and by the 4. You would not do this. That is not going to be accurate. So again, remember, the distributive property would only work if the quantity that's in parentheses is a sum or a difference. So this would have to say 5, 2 plus 4, or would have to say 5 times the quantity 2 minus 4. Both of these would be the distributive property, but this is not considered the distributive property. Here are 2 examples. It says to use the distributive property to simplify each expression. So in each of these, we would take the number in front, in this case it's the 5, and we would multiply it by the 4, 5 times 4. We would then subtract, and we'd multiply the 5 times the 2, 5 times 2, and you would end up with 20 minus 10 is equal to 10, and that would be your final answer for simplifying that expression. Take a look at the second example and notice that the 2 is at the end of the sum that is in parentheses. Also notice that we have a variable x in this example. So let's take a look at what would happen here. In this problem, we would take the 2 and we would distribute it to the x and to the 4. And so we would multiply x times 2, and we would add that to 4 times 2. X times 2 is 2x, and 4 times 2 is 8. And since the first term has an x in it, and the second term does not, we cannot add these together. And so our final answer would be 2x plus 8. So now you know how to use the distributive property, and this is going to come in handy again when you begin to start simplifying expressions before you can solve equations and inequalities.